Hello everyone, this is Mr. Harper and we're going to continue our discussion on muscles today. And the thing I want to talk to you today about is two things. One, the structure of a muscle itself. So if I take a muscle, what are the pieces and parts that it's made out of? That's the anatomy part of this. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about how does a muscle contract. When it contracts, it gets shorter. Well, how does it do that? What's going on that makes that muscle shorter? And this can get, guys, very, very, very involved, very detailed, very difficult. We're going to take it on the surface. We're going to get just the general ideas, okay? So don't panic on that. That's the physiology part of it. So let's jump into this anatomy. So a muscle fiber is nothing more than another name for a muscle cell. We're talking about skeletal muscles here, and I should say that. And skeletal muscles can be very big, and we call that muscle cell a muscle fiber. So we're talking about the cell of a muscle, what's going on in it. So skeletal muscle is made of many smaller pieces called fascicles. The fascicles, or I shouldn't say that skeletal muscle, but the whole muscle is made of many fascicles. The fascicles are made of many muscle cells or fibers. And the muscle fibers, the muscle cells, are made of myofibrils, and each myofibril is made of a piece called a sarcomere. Sarcomere has ends called Z-lines and thick and thin proteins. The thick protein is called myosin, the thin is called actin. Let me show you a picture of it because it makes a heck of a lot more sense. So here it is, we have this entire muscle. This is a piece of the deltoid coming down off the shoulder onto the upper arm. Okay, so here's the deltoid. If we look inside of there, deltoid, where we've cut it off, we can see there's many of these little small round pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, about 19 or 20 different pieces. Each one of these pieces that this muscle is made out of is called a fascicle. Okay? Now, this is inside of a muscle cell that this muscle is made out of. A muscle fiber now we're getting into. So here's one of these fascicles. As you can see, the fascicle is made of stuff too. Each fascicle is made of a muscle cell or fiber. Here they are. Okay, and we've got all of these that are all in a bunch. We can talk about the outer sheaths of them and everything. We're not going to bother with all that. Now, if we look inside of here, now we have muscle cells, and you can see the individual nuclei of the cells. Some muscle cells have multiple nuclei. Don't worry too much about that. But here's these muscle cells or fibers. This cell or fiber, you can look inside of it, is made of many small packed smaller pieces called myofibrils. There's a whole ton of them. Here we're looking at one myofibril. Here it is. Now, we can take this myofibril and cut it into sections. The end of the section is called a Z-line. So here's a Z-line. There would be another one down here. You can't see it. They've cut it off right at it. Here's a section. This section is called a sarcomere. Here's another section, Z-line to Z-line. See that? And then here's Z-line to Z-line. There's another section to Z-line right roughly in here. That's another section. So now we can look at the section or piece of that myofibril called a sarcomere. Now if we look inside the sarcomere, you can see that there's these teal colored things that are big and thick in the middle, and then these little thin red pieces that are separated in the middle that are around those teal pieces. The big teal piece is called myosin. It's a protein, or myosin filament. And the small red pieces are called actin, or they're also proteins, or actin filaments. So that's the anatomy, what the muscle is made out of. Here's another way of looking at the sarcomere. We're going to focus in on that little small piece because that's when we're going to talk about physiology of how the muscle gets shorter. So we're talking about this smallest piece of this overall muscle. Now we're focusing in on just this of the whole thing. All right, so let's go back and forward again. So if you look at this, here's the Z-line on one end of the sarcomere. Here's the Z-line on the other end of the sarcomere. Here's another sarcomere starting. So what you have is this. You have an actin filament, another actin filament. The actin filaments or proteins are attached to the Z-line on both ends. And they're split in the middle. And then here's actin filament and actin filament on the other side too, also split in the middle. This dark line here, that's not part of this sarcomere. It's just there to show you that's what the sarcomere is. Now, in the middle of this sarcomere is a big thick protein that is called myosin. And you notice that it's not attached to the Z lines on the end. It's free. And that there are these little tiny pieces that go from the myosin to the actin on all four sides. Here, 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 and here. Those little tiny pieces are called cross bridges. And those cross bridges can attach and detach from the actin. So they can grab the actin and they can let it go. Here those cross bridges are shown in a little bit bigger detail. Kind of like oars on a rowboat or something. Now, let's talk about the physiology of it now. What's going on that makes this muscle contract? So, during the muscle contraction, these little fibers called cross bridges reach out and grab a hold of these little binding sites on the actin. So this cross bridge reaches out from myosin, it grabs actin. It grabs it on this side, it grabs it on this side. Grabs it here, grabs it here, grabs it here, grabs it here, grabs it over here. And look at these arrows. What they do then is they move kind of like oars on a rowboat, and they push. So from this side, these cross bridges move and they push. And what they do is they push the actin that's attached to these lines toward the center. And from this side, they push in this direction, and they push this whole thing on this side toward the center. So right now what we have is a sarcomere that is not contracted. Now take a look at this. Now, if you look at this, there's a gap between the actin when it's not contracted. Now look at this. The actin has overlapped, okay? And it's made this sarcomere shorter, and it's also made it a little thicker from the overlapping. When you, say for example, flex and your bicep muscle pops up, it's getting thicker because these individual sarcomeres are getting shorter and they're overlapping, and that makes them a little bit thicker. Okay? And this happens over and over and over again. Every time a muscle contracts, those little cross bridges reach out from the myosin, they grab the actin, and they pivot or move and push the actin toward the center. That's what's happening, and that makes it overlap. So, this is called the sliding filament model. The filaments are actin and myosin, and they slide over top of each other or overlap, and that's why it's called that. The sliding filament model, a model of how the muscle contracts. So we've talked about two things. We talked about what a skeletal muscle is made of, from the biggest to the smallest pieces, and we've also talked about how that smallest piece, the sarcomere, contracts and gets shorter, and that's the piece of the muscle that actually gets shorter when a muscle contracts. And when that muscle gets shorter, as it gets shorter, whatever it's attached to, it pulls on, and that's how muscles cause movement. They get shorter when they contract and pull and cause something to move. We'll talk more next time.